Is there a motion to open the March 7th, 2022 Board of Education meeting? Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. We are open. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Nice to be back in the library with everybody. We will move on to public input number 1. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to address the board pursuant to the rules of public input number 1, which we read last time, now would be the time to do it. Or if you're joining us via Zoom, raise your hand in the chat room and Mr. Fisher will unmute you so we can all hear you. Is there anybody here for public input 1? Come on up to the podium. State your name, not your address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Hi guys, my name is Diane Lane. I am very happy to be here. I'm glad this is in person, even though there'll be just very few in front of me. But so I just had a question for everybody about the status of the COVID protocols that are still in place in school, specifically with lunch. My daughter, and Brittany, thank you so much. She took care of an issue that my daughter had with lunch. The 6th graders are now allowed to eat in the cafeteria, but I am under the impression that the rest of the school, except for seniors, they're not able to use the cafeteria. So my question is, are we moving away from that, or is there a reason why that's still in place?
You want me to answer?
If you know, Mr. Nichols.
Well, I think, number one, we're in a transition time right now because we just did away with the masks. But what we're reconciling now, and I'll touch upon in my superintendent's report, is that with the removal of the masks, we have to be very, very cognizant of the contact tracing requirements. So if we put kids in the lunchroom in all settings, we just want to make sure that we do it in a way that doesn't result in us having to put a bunch of kids or classifying a bunch of kids as close contacts. So we're taking probably the next week or so to work through that. Mr. Malone, Ms. Carriero, are you?
So what I told the staff is we're trying to do a slow transition to see how it goes. So the 6th grade was an easy one to move to the lunchroom because it was one class. They can be potted when they're sitting eating lunch, and then when they're outside, it's okay, and that's from the Department of Health guidance. So I'm slowly transitioning. And due to, and Mr. Nichols is going to talk about it with the contact tracing, I'm slowly transitioning on purpose because of how we have to try contact tracing. It's a little bit more complicated at the middle high school level than at the elementary, and I don't want to have to quarantine or do anything with that.
I'll get into that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome.
Thanks for coming. Anybody else here or on Zoom that wants to partake in public input number 1? Mr. Fisher, any hands?
There is a comment in the chat.
That I can't read from here. I can see the hand.
I don't understand why not.
I can't see that.
The question is, I thought that contact tracing has been also ended.
So the answer to that was they're partially right. It was ended before they did away with the mask mandate. When they did away with the mask mandate, that was adjusted so that schools do have to go through it. And I'll touch upon that in my superintendent's report.
Great, thank you. Any other hands or questions?
Mr. Nichols, could you speak up a little bit when you're talking so the mic picks you up a little bit better?
Sure, thank you.
Let's move on to section 5 of tonight's agenda, the superintendent's report. Mr. Nichols.
Thanks, Brian. So I'll try to speak a little louder so I'm picked up by the mic. Pretty quick superintendent's report. I want to touch upon just a quick review of the data so that we're consistent with what we've done for the the last 2 years. I want to talk a little bit about how we're dealing with the new requirements as they relate to contact tracing, close contacts, and even students returning to school who test positive. And then lastly, a few comments about field trips. So the data is still very, very good. The test positive data that was posted today, the 7th, which is from March 6th, was in Suffolk County 1.7%, 7-day average 1.5. The number of cases per 100,000 residents in Suffolk was 3.9 for yesterday, the 7-day average 6.3, and there were only 58 cases in Suffolk County, which is very low compared to where we were at even a couple of weeks ago. So we're trending in the right direction. A couple of letters have gone out to the school community, and in answer to Ms. Wayne's question, I talked a little bit about how things have changed a bit. So let me review some of the more important points. Number one, if a student, staff member comes down with COVID, they are permitted to return to school on day 6. And when they return to school on day 6, they're required, and it's important to note the difference between recommended and required. In this instance, they're required to wear a mask day 6 through day 10. And again, that's for people who test positive. If you're classified as a close contact, it's recommended, it's not a requirement, but it's recommended that those people who are classified as close contact take a test on day 1 and a test on day 5. So if I was in a class and someone in my class tested positive, I should take a rapid antigen test, which we have in school and we're giving out, on day 1 and on day 5. Obviously, if I test positive, then I don't come to school for 5 days. If I test negative, I'm still in school.
Okay.
It's recommended, not required, but recommended strongly by the Department of Health that if you're classified as a close contact, you wear a mask for 10 days from the point of exposure. And again, the difference between recommended and required, we can't really enforce it, but good practice for all districts is that it's recommended that you mask for 10 days. Contact tracing. So in instances where students are in one class for the majority of the day, and Ms. Carriero alluded to this, contact tracing is, we go with group contact tracing, and that's what the Department of Health recommends. So if I'm in a pre-K through grade 6 classroom and somebody in my class tests positive, that whole class, every person in that class is deemed a close contact. So today we had a situation in the elementary school where that was the case. Mr. Malone sent a letter informing the parents of the protocols in terms of testing on day 1 and day 5. He sent home the students with tests, or how did we do that?
We did.
We
Students
did.
went home today with the test.
And then with directions in the letter where to upload the results, even if they're negative, to a school-based website or link, and then if it's positive, in addition to the Suffolk County Department of Health. It's a little bit different at the high school, a lot different at the middle school, high school, grades 7 through 12, because students are not cohorted in one class throughout the whole day. So I could have different groups of students that I sit in math, science, social studies, English, foreign language, and thus you can't do group contact tracing, or otherwise the whole school or a large number of students would be classified as close contacts. So those investigations are happening individually. So if I was an 8th grade student and I was in Spanish 2, and a student in my class tested positive, then the administration would actually have to go into that classroom and determine whether or not anyone in that class met the definition of a close contact, which the CDC has on their website. So that'll be somewhat laborious for Ms. Carriero and her staff, but that's the only way to go about doing it. And if you recall, when close contacts were required to be quarantined a year ago, this whole issue at the middle school, high school presented a significant issue. Because rather than quarantining just a class, we were quarantining 40, 60, 80 students because of the fact that they interacted with different students during the school day. So that's the differentiation between group contact tracing, which is pre-K through 6, and individual contact tracing grades 7 through 12. The last thing I want to talk about are field trips. We're transitioning based on the data to trying to get to a more pre-pandemic environment. So I had written to the board that I recently approved overnight trips to 2 robotics competitions and the Model United Nations. Those trips often have separate requirements in terms of proof of vaccination or a negative test. And because it's an extracurricular trip, the entity that is running those trips is able, or those entities are able to set their own requirements for admission. And it doesn't run afoul of education law because it's considered not part of the school day, the regular school day, but an added activity. So in both the robotics and the Model UN trips, there are requirements that are set forth, but I would be inclined moving forward to really start to consider more trips for our students. I'm thankful they have some requirements, but even in instances where they don't, I'm more inclined to consider them as the numbers continue to decrease. I did deny or cancel the trip to Italy. That was a different situation because the logic there was that there was still a quarantine requirement an isolation requirement when I made that decision a couple of weeks ago. So if you were a student and you were in Italy and you tested positive, you had to remain in the country even after the trip returned to the United States. So there was no way I could approve that. We are considering overnight trips. The grade level advisors for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they traditionally run a trip, an overnight trip, and they've made it known to Ms. Carriero and her staff, the other administrators, that they'd like to do that. I'm not quite sure where I stand on that, but I definitely don't want to rule it out. So we'll keep an eye on the data when the deadline is for the students to sign up, and we'll make a decision. And again, if the data continues to be very positive, I would be inclined to consider that. So that's sort of a summary. Happy to answer any questions.
Any board questions for Mr. Nichols on that update?
One for those overnight trips, to the extent that they're actually being planned, do you have dates for them, just so parents can be aware and put them on their calendar?
Not for the 6, 7, and 8 yet, but as soon as we do, we will.
Can you repeat what's the protocol again? So let's say the case we have to be at elementary, that one student was identified as positive. So what happens? You send them I heard they were supposed to wear masks immediately, right, in the classroom.
So what happens is if a student in a particular class tests positive, then all of the students in that student's class are classified as close contacts for the Department of Health. And Mr. Malone sends a letter home with the test kits and encourages the parents to test on day 1 and day 5, just to be safe. And then also makes them aware of the Suffolk County Department of Health recommendation, which is you should mask for 10 days from the last point of exposure, or from your initial point of exposure, excuse me. Yeah.
So close contact is not anymore the 3 or 6 feet, it's the whole classroom, basically.
In the elementary classroom, that's what the Suffolk County Department of Health said, yeah. In the middle school, high school, we're drilling down to that degree of specificity because they're in like 5 or 6 classes throughout the day. So it's a different deal.
I have 2 quick questions. Thank you for the update.
Yeah.
And it seems all encouraging, which is wonderful. 2 things. One, as we returned to school this week or last week without masks in midweek, what was the experience of the students? Did we find that some wore masks, some didn't, and everybody kind of got along and respected each other? I understand that there was a discussion with each grade level.
Yeah, at the discussion with each grade level at in grades 6 through 12, and then Mr. Malone did morning program, and then also met with his teachers to talk to each individual class. About 20%, 25% of the students at the elementary school wore masks. In the middle school, high school, those numbers were around 20-25% at the middle level, and as you got up in grades, the mask wearing percentage went down. I'm not aware of any instances where students were made to feel uncomfortable, but I know enough to know that just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean it didn't happen. From what my anecdotal observations are, it seemed to me that kids were pretty comfortable in the building. So when I'm walking through the hallway, I could see 4 or 5 kids in a peer group walking down the hall, and 2 of them would have a mask and 3 wouldn't. And they were all laughing and giggling and that kind of thing. But I'm sure that each situation presents a different challenge for students depending on their level of comfort with masking or not.
Right. Thank you for that. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And then the other question, I know it's probably premature because we're only, in March, but if the numbers remain the same or continue to improve, can the assumption be that those seminal end of year events will be in person and be more traditional and normal to previous years?
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had done away with the spectator capacity limits even for indoor games, indoor contests. So again, if the numbers stay the way they are, I could see having, academic awards and graduation and everything in a traditional format. But again, let's see what happens, but I'm hopeful.
Sure. Thank you.
I actually have one more question.
Sure.
And this is probably for Mr. Malone. Given the contact tracing and the exposure in the elementary school based on classes, now that you're starting to have morning program with a full grade, if a kid tests positive in that grade, does that cause the whole grade to be a close contact if they were all in morning program together?
So the conversation that school nurse, Ms. Kriegman, and I had with the Department of Health did still ask us to reflect on the distance that the children may have had. So in the class, that's very hard to maintain during the school day, obviously. But at the setting of morning program in the gym, when it's just the one grade level, this morning, speaking about this morning, we had the entire 3rd grade in the gym. And because this is so new, getting back to it, we did keep distance between the students. So I would be confident to say that we maintained that during the morning program time, and therefore we wouldn't have to. In addition, we're actually keeping it to under 15 minutes, which is the time frame.
Got it. Makes sense.
I didn't know that. I learned something.
Right. Very strategic.
Okay.
Any other questions from board members or any questions in the chat box or hands, Mr. Fisher, for people online or anybody here has a question about what the update was? One hand? All right.
So Heather Hartstein.
Okay. Are you gonna read the question or is she gonna?
I hope she's coming up.
Okay.
Would you appear on the big screen? There she is.
Yep.
Sorry. Guys, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, apologies. Hello, everybody. Heather Hartstein. I just have a quick question, and it's in reference to the high school and the trips. I heard Mr. Nichols reference the robotics and the Model UN trip being approved, and I wanted to know what the status of the physics trip was.
The physics trip was also one that I was going to approve, but it doesn't, it's not an overnight trip. So that's why I didn't bring it up today.
Okay, so I had asked Ms. Carriero about it before break, and I just wanted to double check that even though it's not an overnight trip, that will follow the same permissiveness as the other general field trips?
At this point, the decision is to go forward with that.
Okay, awesome. That's great. And then I guess my second question is just a clarification, and that's in reference to the contact tracing and the difference between, how that's handled from pre-K 6 to above. And I just wanted to clarify what I heard was, I heard it from Mr. Malone and from you, Mr. Nichols. I'm hearing the word encouraging parents to test and submit tests. I just want to be clear on that myself. That's not mandated, right? That remains the parental choice.
Yeah, the only requirement set forth in the Department of Health guidance that is a requirement or a mandate is that when you test positive and you return to the school on day 6, you're required to mask from day 6 through 10. But
Okay.
for all of the other pieces related to close contacts, in terms of testing on day 1 and day 5 and masking for 10 days from the initial point of contact, those are recommendations. I'd like to think that the community, in the interest of keeping everybody safe, would be diligent in following that. But those are recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other hands or questions?
Brian, what are we doing then? Just
Just,
public
we were just
input,
asking on the end of Jeff's COVID update.
so we're just having an
That's
extra public input.
Yeah, now we're gonna move on from there. Okay, we're gonna move to the administrator's report. Mr. Nichols.
So why don't we start with Mr. Malone?
Mr. Nichols, should I go to the podium?
Yeah.
Probably the best they could hear you, yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll see you then, otherwise you're just a
I'm gonna be
voice.
quick, Good evening, everyone. So as we just mentioned a moment ago, I'm happy to report that after a 2-year hiatus, morning program returned to the gymnasium this morning. We welcomed the 3rd grade students today, tomorrow 4th grade, 5th grade Wednesday, and so on. And it was a great moment for the kids and for the staff. For those that aren't familiar, and I know there are some new members of the community that over the last 2 years have not seen morning program, it's really an institution here in Sag Harbor. It's the way we've started the day at the elementary school for, I think I'm correct, more than 25 years. So it's a big part of this community, and it's all about coming together and starting the day with song and birthday celebrations. Our 5th graders do announcements. It's really central to what the elementary school is about. I'm very proud of the staff for keeping it alive over the last 2 years. So I do want to send a particular thank you to our music staff, because over the last 2 years, we've done morning program remotely. And Mr. Lahan, Mr. Fox, and Ms. Nicasio, along with support from one of our teaching assistants, Ms. Randall. Every morning from a makeshift studio in the building, they've helped present morning program, and all the students, families were welcome to tune in via a YouTube link. And that was great, but being back today is what it's all about. Eventually, if things keep moving in this positive direction and we all continue to cooperate, we can make the group larger. And then I'm looking forward to the day when we can actually welcome guests back in, because another important part of it was that families were able to be with the student body in the morning and kind of stay abreast of what's going on in the school and being directly tuned into life at the elementary school. So really good day today. We're looking forward to how that rolls out in the coming weeks. 5th grade buddies. 5th graders have kindergarten buddies, and again, that's another important tradition at the elementary school. All of our 5th graders, the oldest members of the school, partner up with a kindergarten student and kind of mentor them throughout the year and enjoy different activities. This past Friday, unfortunately, we had to cancel the ice skating trip because the Buckskill ice rink was having some issues with their chiller, but Ms. Reynoso and I were happy to learn today that things are fixed, so we're going to do the trip on Friday. 5th grade kindergarten buddy trip at Buckskill Winter Club, another great tradition coming back. And lastly, next Monday, with the the work of Jen Brandt in our cafeteria, we're bringing a grab and go lunch program, offering that to the elementary school families on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at the cost of $4.25, a reasonable price. Students will get a lunch or a wrap, some sides, and a healthy beverage. And thanks to Ms. Buscemi, we were able to purchase a grab and go refrigerator. It'll be positioned on the lower level of the elementary school, and then the kids will be able to come down and select their lunch. And I think what's great about that is they start to get a feel for what it's like to actually go to a cafeteria and make an order, and they'll feel like the big kids, and they'll love that. So that's the report from the elementary school.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Malone? Great, thank you so much. Dr. Walker.
All right, good evening, everyone. The middle high school's been busy. This is our time of year where we're actually scheduling for next year. So it's a bit busy in our offices trying to make sure that we have all the course requests that kids can get and making sure we're being student-centered with that. On Wednesday, for Mr. McGovern to update everybody, our boys basketball team will be playing Carl Place in the Long Island Championship for the Southeast Regional Semifinal at 4 o'clock at Center Ridge High School. Our IB informational night that is held by our Director of International Baccalaureate Diploma Program, Mike Guinan, our high school assistant principal, will be held on March 31st, which will be an in-person event. The high school musical, which is the spelling bee, is the weekend of April 7th. And parents should have gotten, and a lot of parents actually did do the survey and completed a survey, because we are trying to figure out at the middle high school how best to serve our parents and our community for our parent-teacher conferences. It's looking like we're going to be doing a hybrid schedule where different time slots are either going to be online or in person. We will be not all in the gym. We might be spread out throughout the building, but in close proximity, just because of making sure we are distant and social distance and making everyone feel comfortable, but because everyone has a different COVID comfort level, as well as we have been working on at the middle school level, making sure, because March can be a long time before spring break and our middle schoolers like to move around, having a week of Whaler Wars and activities just to get our community and culture together.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Carriero? Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Discuss. I forgot to mention.
Come on back up.
What? No, parent-teacher conference. Right?
Oh, actually, no, PTA. So I just wanted to mention to the elementary parents that there will be a PTA meeting tomorrow at 9:30. We're going to hold the meeting in person. It will be in the gymnasium of the Sag Harbor Learning Center. So 9:30 Learning Center gym. I guess I can mention parents.
Yeah, why not?
Sure. Spring parent-teacher conferences are scheduled for Thursday, April 7th and Friday, April 8th. Children at the elementary school will get dismissed at 11:15 both days, and those will be in person as well. And some scheduling information will be coming to parents shortly.
Great.
Thank you.
Question? Move on to section 6.2, school business administrators report, Mr. Shannon.
Yes, so tonight, we're going to go through the remaining sections of the budget that we haven't gone through before. So tonight, we are going to talk about the elementary and secondary parts of the budget. And originally, we had planned to do the PPS, Pupil Personnel Services, which includes special ed, athletics, and Boces budgets. We were going to actually present those on March 21st. But we did complete those budgets, so we felt that it would be better to present everything that we currently have, and then we're going to do a full budget review at the next meeting. So you'll be able to see all salaries salaries, benefits, material supplies, contractual equipment, everything all put together at the next meeting. And then we'll have a meeting on April 11th where we'll also do a budget review. And then from then on, we'll talk about also the contingent budget, and we'll give out some more information about, previous budget votes and also the tax levy impact if it does change at all. So we made a couple of changes. The last presentation we had was on February 7th. And there were a few changes that we had to make, based on additional information. So back on February 7th, we were saying that we still had $200,000 worth of budget reductions that we had to find in order to get to that 2.5% budget to budget increase. And thanks to all the administrators and all their hard work, we were able to go in and look at all of our codes, look at all of our spending, all of our needs for next year, and we were able to find those reductions. So our budget to budget increase going into next year is definitely going to be 2.5%. Our tax levy increase is going to be 2.5%, which is under the property tax limit of 2.73%. So at the last meeting, our tax levy limit was actually 2.75%, and we had to make a couple of changes to that tax levy limit calculation also. So we'll move on to the next slide and we'll go through some of those changes. Actually, we'll talk about revenue first, and then we'll talk about the changes to the tax levy limit. So this is the summary of all of our revenue sources that support the budget. And you'll see on the bottom of the slide, you'll see the 2.5% tax levy increase. And these are all supported by our state aid numbers that we got from the governor back in January. All of our additional revenues that we collect, non-resident tuition, shared services for transportation, and we have a lot of miscellaneous items that we also collect during the year. So we are still waiting for this New York State budget to pass, and that state budget is usually due April 1st. So we will get a revised state aid run before then or around that time. So for our next meeting on March 21st, none of these state aid numbers are going to change, but for the April 11th budget presentation, these numbers may change slightly. So many times when the state budget is adopted, our state aid usually increases slightly. We're not projecting a huge increase in state aid. What's going to happen is if we did receive a little more money in state aid here, for instance, if we received another $50,000 in state aid here, we're going to end up reducing our appropriated fund balance by about $50,000, by the same amount. So nothing else is going to change. The total budget's not going to change. Everything else on this slide will stay the same. And you'll see our general fund tax levy, which is going up by roughly $1 million. You'll see that 2.5% reflected right here. And now the tax levy limit, we'll talk about some of the changes to our tax levy limit calculation since the last time we met, which is the next slide. So this number went from 2.75 to roughly 2.73. And the reason for that change was because we did have to recognize some additional aid that reduced our exclusion. So that was reflected in here. And then the other thing that we made a change is the purchase of the Suburban bus. It turns out that student that we were projecting that we were going to be transporting next year, and we felt we would save money by purchasing the Suburban. It turns out that the student may not be attending that school. So we took the purchase of the Suburban bus out of the calculation. We also removed the appropriated fund balance for that Suburban bus out of the calculation. And right now we took the $75,000 and we added it back to our contractual transportation line because right now we don't know exactly where that student will end up. So we're going to keep that money in contractual transportation until we decide on how that student's being transported next year. But nothing else on this slide has changed. So you can see that our tax levy limit this year is much higher than last year. So our limit last year was roughly 1.49%, this year 2.73%. That is really, the main factor driving that up is this levy growth factor, this 2% levy growth factor, which was the maximum it could be. 2% is the maximum tax levy growth factor you can have. It's based on inflation. Our inflation rate was actually 4.7%. But the levy growth factor could only go up by 2%. Last year, the inflation rate was much lower, and that growth factor was only 1.23%. So that was really one of the biggest drivers of why our levy limit was higher this year than last year. It wasn't because of our exclusions, because you'll see our exclusions actually went down. So last year, we had tax levy exclusions of just under 1.7 million, which is really for all of our debt service and our Boces capital costs. And this year, those exclusions actually went down because we did pay off more debt. So that's why you're seeing that number being lower.
Or actually, no more questions to be asked or asked during.
I would ask if you have a question, just
Okay.
so we don't have to go back.
Thank you. Quick question just about that bus. It sounds like it's not definitive whether we will need to purchase the bus or not, correct?
Yes, so that's why we ended up removing it.
Right. If we end up, are we still gonna have the proposition in May? Because if we do need to have the bus, we would want to have the latitude to be able to purchase it, and we do need the public's approval to transfer those funds.
No,
Or use
because
those
right
funds,
now, it seems very unlikely. Just speaking to, the director, we felt that because it wasn't, the first year of the bus, we wouldn't be saving money. We would be pretty much breaking even. We would see savings more in the second and third year since the student was only a sixth grader. So we felt it would be better to not purchase it right now and just keep the money back in contract transportation.
And just
So
wait and see how it
until,
plays out?
until we
Okay.
see what happens.
Thank you.
I mean, technically, if anything changes from now till, the next meeting, I mean, we definitely could update you and let you know. So,
Thank you.
Can we go back to page 3, the previous one?
Yeah.
I just want to see the fund balance. Were these the forecasted numbers or the actuals?
okay, so can you go back one? Okay, so this is our fund balance right here.
Yeah.
And you can see for 2020, 2021, the district was using a little under $1.6 million in fund balance. For the current year, we were able to reduce that down to a little less than 1 million. Next year, because of this increase in this tuition line, which is a huge increase, $500,000, we're decreasing our appropriated fund balance.
But those
So
figures we're looking at the previous years, those were the forecasted numbers or the actuals?
these were the budgeted numbers that were included, the actuals.
Oh,
That
so
were
those
included
were
in
the
the budget.
actuals.
Yeah, so this
Okay.
is the amount of fund balance we appropriated for
Uh-huh.
last year, this year, and next year. And this is really being driven by that 500,000. That's
Okay.
that 500,000 being transferred down. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us flexibility at the end of the year, because the appropriate fund balance is really like it's prior year's surplus,
Mhm.
funding the future year's budget. So that'll give us actually more money at the end of the year to put towards our capital reserve, which we talked about our reserves and how our capital reserve is very important to be funded. And we really want to be able to increase that each year so we can get our capital projects done. So I think you can move forward now too. And we are required to submit our tax levy limit calculation to the state controller's office. And this is just a summary of everything that was submitted on March 1st to them and all the numbers. They all calculate the same as the worksheet. And you'll see that our levy limit for next year is $41,428,308. We're going to be under that limit. We're going to go out with $41,333,873, which is just under, it's about $100,000 under the limit, our proposed levy for next year. Just go to the next one. And the impact of that 2.5% tax levy increase is shown right here on the slide. So the upper part of the slide is town of Southampton. The lower part is town of East Hampton. And what we do is we provide an estimate based on all the current assessed values and equalization rates of each town. And we're giving you, when we call the town and ask them what is the actual median home value in the town of Southampton told us it was about $874,800. Town of East Hampton said it was about $905,172. So when you plug in these numbers for median home value, you'll see that that tax levy increase is going to, we're projecting a little bit under $100 a year for the town of Southampton residents and a little bit over $100 a year for the town of East Hampton residents. And then we have, we just have a projected amount if your home value is closer to the $500,000 or the $1 million. So you can see how that changes. Monthly impact of that $100 is roughly $8.28 per month. All of these numbers though are subject to change based on assessed values. So we don't know what the assessed values are really until the budget is adopted in May. We actually start the school year July 1st, and assessed values really aren't set in stone until September. So these numbers are definitely could change, and if they change drastically, we will come back and let the taxpayers know exactly what those changes are. Go forward. So I wanted to start tonight's budget presentation talking about salaries again, because we did have a lot of discussion about salaries at the January 24th meeting. And we talked about the changes to all of the salaries, and we also wanted to dive deeper into the increase in the special ed salaries. So on January 24th, this is the chart that we showed. We had salaries roughly $25,510,708. Since that time, we had to increase that number slightly. There was a little bit of an increase in instruction, and there was actually a little bit of a decrease in special education. So you'll see the new number for salaries going into next year is $25,520,167, which equates to a 4.81% increase. We did go through these percentage changes at that meeting, at the January 24th meeting, but tonight we'll talk a little bit more about this special ed increase of 14.36%, which is $426,000 increase from year to year. So we'll go to the next slide. No, back. There should be a couple back. Back.
What?
Yep, all the way. Yep, back, 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 back. Okay, here, leave it here. Okay, so what we did was we wanted to reconcile that $426,935, and we did write down here, and this is really showing the total variance. So what happened is that we did have a lot of changes in special ed during the current year, which is driving the increase for next year. So we actually had an influx of students who needed services, IEP students this year, and there was also some scheduling conflicts that actually had us, was the reason why we had to hire some new staff. So I'm going to go through this with you a little bit. So the 21-22, this is all of these staff that are included in the 21-22 budget, which is the current year. And during the current year, we actually had to bring back one of our one-year hires from last year into the current year, and we had to hire 2 more teachers. And then on the bottom, you'll see these are TAs. So we actually had to hire 4 more TAs to address the needs going into this year, which is driving the increase into next year. So if you look at the changes, you'll see, so we had 1 teacher on top who was inactive, who was originally budgeted in the current year. We have another teacher who is budgeted in the current year, but they're actually moving to general ed. We have 3 general ed, we have actually 2 general ed teachers this year that are going into special ed next year. We have another teacher here who a portion of his salary was actually budgeted in a federal grant. So we're bringing 100% of his salary back into the general fund budget. And then you can see here, this was the 1-year appointment that was here last year. She stayed this year, but she wasn't originally included in the budget. So we have her down here as a new hire for the current year. And then we have 2 more teachers here that were new hires as teachers. TAs is almost the same thing happening with the TAs. We have 1 TA who is budgeted in the current year who's now inactive. We have 2 other TAs that are budgeted in the current year in special ed. They're moving to general ed next year. We have 4 more TAs here that were actually budgeted in general ed this year, and they're going to be budgeted in special ed next year. And then we have 4 new TA hires. So this is really what's driving this difference. So you can see that we had $754,000 added to the budget, and $395,000 in reductions to the budget. That came out to $359,476. If you look at total special ed salaries of $2,973,077, we had to apply a step increase to that. And then your total variance is right here, the $426,935. So on the flip side, though, when you look at the budget in the later slides, you're actually going to see almost the same amount of reductions made to all of the codes for special ed equipment, supplies and materials, contractual, and Boces. So we're showing that we do have an increase in salaries for teachers, salary-wise, but you're going to see there is going to be a $268,000 reduction in just materials and supplies, contractual, and equipment costs, and another $118,650 in Boces, or I might have had that switched around. So you'll see on the next few slides. We'll move forward. And yeah, that $118,650 is right here. So this is a summary of the elementary, the secondary, the PPS, which includes special ed, athletics, and Boces. And this is the summary of the budget. And you can see that the budget itself overall is going down by $210,457. This reduction is being driven by this $118,000 reduction in special education. And these reductions are really based on student needs for next year. And also there was some contingency that was built into the budget that we felt that we could remove for special ed. There was also athletics. There was equipment that we budgeted for this year, but we didn't need that equipment for next year. So we removed the equipment out of this line. And you could see how the athletics budget for 2020-2021 was $519,388. And then the equipment was added and it went up to $542, $545. Now the equipment's being removed and we're going right down to $507. But overall, the bottom of the slide is just showing you where all of these budget codes fall. And the grand total for the elementary and secondary budgets, there's a slight change of $1,771 overall. PPS, which is special ed, social work, psychology, is going down by $128,250. Athletics is being reduced by $34,570. And Boces overall is getting a reduction of $49,208. And that's being driven by the special ed decrease also. So none of these budget codes include salaries, because we already talked about salaries. And this is really just for equipment, materials and supplies, contractual, and Boces. And we'll go into detail a little bit more.
About the special ed, so is it just based on the explanation, and thank you very much, that makes a lot of sense. Does that make the increase in salary coupled with the reduction in Boces, does that mean that we're keeping more students here in Sag Harbor than sending them other places?
There is, yes, there definitely are students that we are keeping, that we have less students going to Boces next year. So, and we are going to be having some additional students here. So you'll see that's the offset. Overall, the special ed budget, if you include salaries and all of these other items, I think overall there's like a $40,000 increase to the overall special education budget for next year. So, and then you'll see that at the next presentation when we bring everything together, when we bring all of these costs together. But we're going to go, we'll dive a little deeper into these changes. This 1,771, you'll see how some items moved up, some items moved down. You want to go to the next slide?
I think that's a question before we get special ed. Is what we budgeted for this year, how does that compare to what we anticipate the actual expense will be this year?
You got a budget transfer tonight?
We actually
No, I know, I'm
will.
just saying, like in a bigger picture, is what we're actually spending this year closer to what we put in the budget next year? Or I'm just trying to get a
No, we
sense
will
of-
definitely, we will probably have surplus in the special ed area this year, not in salaries, but in the other areas that we just talked about, because there was contingency built into those codes that we whittled down
Right.
based on spending and based on next year's need. So that's how we were able to make those reductions. And Dr. Mears has been amazing, just going through every single budget code and every single line item and seeing what can be reduced. So that's how, you know, we were able to find those $200,000 worth of reductions and move forward with the 2.5% budget to budget increase.
And the actuals usually are less than what you budget for special ed because you have to put extra in there in case your student requirements, which are legally obligated to. change during the year.
Yes, there is definitely some contingency built in for that, but just not as much as what was in there for the prior years. So, so if you
Jennifer,
look
I
at
just have
now.
one question.
Mhm.
We'll go back to page 8. So you said some of the teachers and teaching assistants, they were moved from the general pool into special needs. Would there be a reduction from the general pool for these positions, or those are replaced?
No, some of these definitely are replacements. The general, the instructional budget overall, you can see is going up by 3.41%. So part of that 3.41% is really a step increase for all of the general ed teachers. And then the other portion of that 3.41% is there is those salary adjustment lines that are built into the budget, and there may have been some increases in staff going into that 3.41%. But we didn't provide you with a reconciliation because the increase is just so much smaller than the 14.36. So this is the elementary and secondary budgets. Now, we're not showing you every account code because a lot of the account codes in their budgets didn't change at all. So as we said, this is only materials and supplies, equipment, and contractual. So if the budget didn't change from year to year, and you'll see a $0 change, we didn't include it on the slide. So we only included items that showed a change and made up this $1,771. So you'll see some of these changes are just because we were cleaning up account codes. So we're moving some items out of, for instance, I'll give you an example. Yeah, so you'll see we have this regular school contractual PE, and which is right here. So we actually had $2,980 budgeted this year. We don't have anything budgeted in that code for next year. We also took out $400 out of their elementary school PE, but we have this new code now, which is a district-wide code, which makes it a little bit easier for the athletic director to manage the budget for those items. So you'll see that there's 0 in the budget here. There's a reduction in the other line item, and there's an increase in this item. So a lot of it is we're just moving and shifting expenditures around, just cleaning up codes and just making the budget more user-friendly for the staff. We also have the summer school. So the summer school, you'll see right here, summer school materials and supplies, and that's a reduction of $4,200. We actually reduced $35,000 out of the budget for the summer school academy. So in the current year budget, we had salaries and benefits, materials and supplies of $35,000. That academy is now being funded by the ARP grant, the American Rescue Plan grant, for the current year, and I believe it's the next 2 years. So we were able to take that $35,000 out of the budget. So this is part of that $35,000, it's $4,500. And then all of the other areas are just slight increases and decreases. We don't really have any there's really no program changes reflected in the budget. Even though we're showing huge decreases in a lot of areas, all of the programs are staying intact. There aren't any program cuts at all made to the budget at this point. And we'll go to the next slide. And now this is the special ed budget right here. And it's part of pupil personnel services. You'll see the dollar change is negative $128,250. So $118,000 of that is made up from all of the special ed accounts. And you'll see all of the decreases to all of those account codes. And like I said, that's really based on projected student need next year and based on looking at spending and reducing some of the contingency. And also some of these items are also being paid by grants. We received a lot of money in grants just from the CARES Act. So some of these items are being transferred. When you look at the next slide, you'll see a lot of reductions in social work and psychology budgets. They're very small budgets. On the next slide. But you'll see a lot of reductions here because of our grants are actually picking up a lot of these costs. So this $9,600 and that $118,650 make up that decrease of $128,250 overall for pupil personnel services. And let's move forward to the athletic. Now, the athletic budget, I was actually able to get the whole budget onto the slide. So you will see a lot of account codes here with $0 changes. And this is where I was talking about the equipment. So the budget this year, we just didn't need that much in equipment going into next year. So we were able to make those reductions. So that's really what makes up most of this $34,570. Everything else in the budget is intact. We did even include the contractual costs for the park in here, since at the moment we don't really know what's going to happen with those fees. So that is still embedded in these contractual lines right here, and that's why these are so much higher than the rest of the budget. And then we have Boces, and Boces, we made a lot of changes to the Boces budget, and you'll see that overall the Boces budget is going down. We're going to talk about the big changes. The biggest changes are the reduction in Boces services for special ed again. So we just don't have as many students going to Boces next year. And that's how we were able to reduce that Boces budget by $268,000. But you'll see now a huge increase in this computer data processing budget. And that budget in Boces is going up by $247,000 for next year. And we talked about that a little bit during the last budget presentation when we were presenting the technology budget. We were showing that we were reducing some of our technology budget because we were buying more services from Boces. So we're trying to capture a little more Boces aid on these services. And also we're trying to really comply with Ed Law 2D. And by purchasing these services through Boces, we have their protection over all of that personal identifiable information, which the auditors are very, really keyed into looking at right now. So even though we had this big increase and we have this big decrease, overall, we have little increases and decreases in various areas. This Boces services right here, this board docs, was originally budgeted in the BOA, the Board of Education account, and it turns out we actually get billed out of the CDP, the Central Data Processing account. So we removed that out of there. We added that. That's part of the $247,000. But overall, our Boces budget is going down by a little under $50,000 overall.
Can I ask a Boces question, and maybe a question for the other administrators? In terms of Boces, one of the beneficial services they provide obviously is some career services that high school students can take part in. And over the years, we've had many of our students engage in that, and those services that aren't resident here in our school and the surrounding districts. Are we seeing an increase or decrease in that participation?
It's actually increasing. So you'll see this OCED line
Is
here.
that what that is?
And the OCED budget is, they send us their projected costs based on a 3-year rolling average. So you'll see we did have to increase that budget up to increase it by $32,680 because this is a fixed cost and they run all the numbers of how many students we have attending programs. And we actually have, I believe it's one student from, I believe it was like a Wayne-Scott student who actually attends. So we actually bill Wayne-Scott for their portion of that student's time in Boces too.
But we've seen an increase
So
in
like
students.
if you want to take a longitudinal view,
Yeah.
the 1-year view has limited.
You're right. But that would be interesting at another time. I won't put anyone on the spot.
No, you put me on the spot. It's pretty flat.
Okay.
It's usually between like 7 and 13 in that range.
Okay.
I don't know what it is specifically for next year.
I think it went down a little bit. I think we're at 6 so far,
6.
and might be only 5. It just depends on the year.
Yeah, but so even though the student number might go down in 1 year, the actual increase is they bill us based on that rolling average.
Right.
So you may have a decrease in students, but you're actually paying more
Right.
on the
based on the
bill.
rolling out.
Yeah, based on previous years. So, you're welcome. Okay, so now we're really done with our main budget presentation. So if anyone has any questions on what I just presented, we can go through and back to those slides because now we're going to talk again about the unit ventilator project because we did receive more information on installing those unit ventilators into the 1907 wing of Pearson. So
Questions for Ms. Buscemi before we move on?
I think it can be helpful, and this might be something to think about for when the entire budget is presented. But there have been years where we had the building principals talk about either changes to the educational program they're encapsulated here, or just a reminder of the key programs that are currently exist. I think that is helpful because it translates numbers into programs that both families and communities who will be going out to vote can understand and relate to. So perhaps when there's a summary of the budget, there can be that, I don't know if there's anything that we're adding or anything we're doing differently that does affect the budget, but to include that is helpful.
So we'll definitely look into doing that for the next meeting. But program-wise, there weren't too many drastic changes when they did submit their budget. So we'll definitely,
I think what Chris is
provide
saying is in years
some
past,
bullet
like one year
points.
we implemented, Spanish at the elementary
Mhm.
school, or we implemented another art class here, but I don't think we have that.
But even if we're not changing it, because not everybody that, they look at the numbers, but just say, here are the great programs that are still staying intact in the budget. I think that again, just reminds people of the rich programming that we currently offer, and we're able to still remain in, even though we have these budget constraints. So just.
oh yeah, well, we could definitely put something together then for the next meeting and go through, like each department and do that. So, okay, so at the last meeting, we talked about the money that we got from the federal government. So we received $650,000 to improve indoor air quality. And what we worked with our architects to look at both buildings and see how we could best use the money. And we found that if we were able to replace as many classroom unit ventilators as possible, that would it would also provide very high efficiency units for us. We would be able to better heat the buildings, but in addition, we would also be able to cool the buildings if we did apply additional funds to the project and replaced our current unit ventilators that only provide heat with actually an option that provides heat and cooling. So we're going to talk about an update to additional information we have since the last meeting. So you can go to the next slide.
Jennifer, that's a one-time grant?
Yes, it's a one-time grant that they gave us. And so since it was a one-time influx of money, we didn't want to use it on any kind of reoccurring expenses. So this is the reason why we really picked this project, because if we did use it to support our budget, we would have like a huge budget hole going forward.
Seems like a massive amount of money.
That's a small amount compared to what other districts receive. They receive millions and millions of dollars in CARES Act funds. This was the CARES Act that President Biden signed into law, the American Rescue Plan, and the Coronavirus Response and Recovery Act. So those two grants combined, we were able to pull out $650,000 to pay for a portion of this project, which is really great. And that's a big, that's a big objective of the federal government right now, is trying to improve indoor air quality, everywhere because of COVID. So the elementary school. So we went through some of this during the last meeting, and the elementary school has approximately 31 classrooms. 10 of the existing classrooms are cooled with an existing rooftop unit, but 21 of the classrooms currently have no cooling. So this project would replace those 21 existing unit ventilators with steam heating coils and adding self-contained cooling compressors and evaporators that are built into the unit. And completion of this project will bring the cooling to the remaining 67% of classrooms, and the estimated construction cost for the elementary school was $739,200. Moving forward to Pearson, and this is really, in our minds, we felt that we were just going to be thinking about replacing our current unit ventilators. So the next slide with Pearson will show you the cost of replacing. So Pearson, the newer portions of the building do have unit ventilators, and they actually do have unit ventilators with a cooling option inside of them. We just never purchased the chiller, the rooftop unit, and also the chiller that needed to go in the boiler room. So what would happen is we would replace all of those 26 unit ventilators with the same type of unit ventilators that we currently have, but we would also be purchasing the chiller and the rooftop unit. And the price of that would cost us $792,000. None of the 1907 building would be touched with this project. So we were asked to go back to see what we can do with the 1907 building and how much it would cost to actually install the unit ventilators into those parts of the building. So we'll move on to the next slide. So this is basically the floor plans of the 1907 wing of Pearson. And you can see all of the areas in blue is where we currently have baseboard heating, and we would be installing new unit ventilators to those areas. So this is, you'll see the first floor, the second floor, and the third floor cooling plan. This really would address the whole building if this project was done and we move forward with this project. The only thing is this project itself would not be done the same time the other project was getting done. So we were hoping to get all of the unit ventilators replaced at the elementary school and Pearson during the summer of 2023. But because this project really expands the scope and there is a lot of other things that have to be addressed with this project will not be done until the summer of 2024. So we would not, because we just have such a small window of time that we wouldn't be able to fit all of that work during one summer. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see, bless you.
Thank you.
This project, which is greatly expanded now, would provide new hot water piping, circulation pumps, controls, and insulation as part of the installation. And they're currently evaluating the existing exterior masonry facade because there's actually 2 layers of brick in the front of the building that they would have to blow through as part of this project. And but his cost estimate from the last meeting still stayed at 1.5 million because they did look at this during previous walkthroughs when they walked through the building, and they felt that the 1.5 million would definitely be enough to get this project done. And this would essentially provide cooling to almost the whole building, except the middle school wing. So we do have 7 classrooms in the middle school wing that have unit ventilators, but those unit ventilators are actually only 5 years old. So they're not that old, so we're not recommending that they be replaced right now. The other unit ventilators were much older, and they would still receive the window air conditioning for cooling, those 7 classrooms, until they needed new unit ventilators. Then we would convert them into the cooling ones also. So those would really be the only areas, and also the high school gym wouldn't be air conditioned. But let's go to the next slide. So you can see if you add up the cost of the replacing the elementary school unit ventilators, replacing the Pearson Middle School, High School unit ventilators, adding on that $1.5 million for the installation of unit ventilators in the 1907 wing, and soft costs and contingencies. The total project now would be $3,150,000. We would reduce that by the amount of grant funds we have, and the additional funds needed would be $2,500,000. The capital reserve, which I know you're probably going to have a hard time seeing that with the little. Can you make that smaller?
Which part?
Just the little the view. Yeah, that's perfect. So the capital reserve balance at June 30th, 2021 was just under $4.5 million. So we are projecting to increase that capital reserve at June 30th, 2022 by 1.5 million, which is the legal limit. We also are projecting to increase that by 1.5 million at the end of June 30th, 2023. So the balance of June 30th, 2023 would be just under $7.5 million in that capital reserve. We would use $1 million worth of this reserve for the phase 1 of the project, which would occur during the summer of 2023, if we move forward. Then at June 30th, 2024, we're projected to deposit another 1.5 million. And then during the summer of 24, we would do phase 2 of the project, which is 1.5 million. So we're looking at a projected balance in the capital reserve after the project is completely done. At December 31st, 2024, we're looking at a balance of roughly $6,444,000, a little under 6.5 million. So an expenditure from the capital reserve must be authorized by the district voters. But if approved, the project can be completed at no additional cost to taxpayers because we have the funds set aside. The project, can you move it up now? Sorry. So the project will provide a more efficient heating, cooling, and increased air filtration throughout the whole district. And this is where I have written that the unit ventilators in the 7 classrooms located in the middle school wing will not be replaced. And the classrooms will continue to have window air conditioning units. The high school gym will also not be getting new unit ventilators or any cooling in that area, but we're trying to address the needs of the high school gym as part of our 5-year facilities plan. This project does have to be approved by the New York State Education Department, and we do need a building permit if we move forward with it. And but it would have to get done or completed in 2 phases. So in the summer of 2023, we would replace all of the existing unit ventilators, and in the summer of 2024, we will go ahead and install the new unit ventilators in the 1907 wing of Pearson. Let me see in the next slide. And if we move forward, this is what the proposition will look like on the ballot in May. And it just says, shall the Board of Education be authorized to undertake certain capital improvements and for a maximum aggregate cost of $2.5 million, and to appropriate and expend such sums of money from the Facilities Improvement Capital Reserve, which was previously approved by voters on May 18, 2021. So we have 2 options. Since the work isn't being done all at one time, we could possibly have this proposition out on ballot in May for the $1 million. And then we could have another proposition put on the ballot next May for the additional $1.5 million, or we could do it all at once for the $2.5 million if you decide to move forward. So the next meeting, which is March 21st, you will be approving the legal notice for the budget vote. And the legal notice will include all of the proposition language that's going to go out into the newspapers and be advertised. So we would have to decide really today what you would like to move forward with.
Let's see what how the board feels about that. Anyone want to start?
I can start. I raised this issue originally. I'm a big supporter of air quality in the building and improvements, and I think this is a manageable cost based on the amount of money we have in the capital fund to make these improvements. And I think putting it all in one makes it one comprehensive project and vote, and doesn't split things up, and ensures that we will, assuming we get the support of the public, provide improved air quality for the entirety of the district.
I think it makes sense to do it at once in terms of an approval, even though it's a staged plan, so you could work toward that planning and purchase out and get everything ready a year out would be my intent. So I would support asking for the 2.5 on this year's proposal. Jordan?
Yeah, I agree with everything. The one question I have is the middle school wing units that are only 5 years old, by 2024, they will be 7 years old. What's the average lifespan of these units?
They're actually, I think, like 20-year lifespan. So, yeah, right? It's about 20 years. So we would have a little time before. So we would still have the window units in that wing.
Yep, I'm supportive.
Chris?
I agree and with my colleagues and support going through with the full amount this time, just explain that it's tiered. I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
Big surprise. One is that I know that originally when this was presented to us, the idea was that there were cost savings if we did it all at one time. So one question I have, is it going to cost more because we're doing it in a phased? And also, are we having to do it in phased because there's just not enough vendors that can do the work? Because if we can, if we can use more than one vendor that's qualified, I would rather get it all done sooner versus later, because air quality is important. And also, when it gets hot, some of those classrooms are incredibly uncomfortable, particularly at a time when you've got finals and other things going on, and it's just it just seems like a deterrent to learning. So is there any way that that we would be able to do them both at one time?
So right now, it is almost like two separate projects. So you're replacing what we currently have with new units. And then the second half of the project is really installing, removing all the baseboard and installing brand new units, all the piping and everything else. So after discussing, timeline wise with Severio and with Paul, we really felt it was just impossible to get all of that work done in one summer. And we would, you really are talking about 2 months
So,
of being able to get the project done.
yeah, for the public, Severio is our architect. So the architect's guidance was that we couldn't finish both of them in one summer, and thus the notion of spreading it out.
Yeah, it would just be a safer option. We would be able to, as it is, that 2-month period of replacing all of those unit ventilators in the elementary school and Pearson is still going to be tight.
Right.
So that 2 months is going to be really tight for us to have to get all of those guys out of there at least 2 weeks before school starts and clean up, all the mess and everything else. So that's why we're definitely not recommending doing the other portion of the project at the same time, because we know that we're going to run into so many more issues when they start drilling into those walls and the whole facade of the building.
Right.
To make those, air intakes and outtakes, whereas in replacing the ones we already have, there's very minimal work that has to get done to the outside of the building, because we already have everything we need already in place.
And what was the decision-making process to go do the elementary school first and then Pearson second? Was there a greater need there, or?
Well, we originally, when we found out we were getting this money, we wanted to make sure we were improving air quality throughout the whole district.
Correct.
So that's why we started off, the project was just going to be replacing what we currently have. And then after speaking with Mr. Malone and the architect and looking at all of these, the inefficient units that we have in the school right now, how, part of the building has the window units, part of the building has the rooftop unit. I mean, it's just such an inefficient way of cooling the building. We felt that this would be really a great way for us to get two things done, at once. Not only are we improving indoor air quality and making the units more efficient, we're also cooling now those sections of the building.
So you felt like the elementary school was more of a priority to get done sooner than Pearson?
No, we wanted to get as many units replaced in Pearson also. But the thing is Pearson doesn't have as many units that the building itself doesn't have as many units in it. And that's why we were just addressing replacement at the time. We weren't even looking at the bigger project of actually installing new units.
Right, but the new plan is you're going to do the elementary school first and then Pearson second.
No, elementary and Pearson are all the unit ventilators going to get replaced in one summer.
Okay.
In elementary and Pearson.
Okay.
All
Then I misunderstood that.
Yeah, replacements are all getting done during one summer.
Okay. and then
Installation is all getting done during next summer.
Installation of the new AC.
Okay, so
unit.
replacement is year
Yes,
one,
replacement is year
New-
one.
the new installation is year
Yes.
two.
Okay,
New
I misunderstood.
installation, which is much more, we
Thank
feel as though we're gonna run into some more problems with the installation in the
Okay.
1907 building. So that's why we're replacing all of the units district-wide, Pearson and elementary school. Sorry.
So the
That's
replacement for
confusion.
in the district is year one, and then the new cooling for the district is year two.
The new cooling for Pearson, which Pearson's the only one that's gonna need new cooling units
Is year
now,
two.
is year two.
Okay, I misunderstood that. So
Okay.
that's very helpful. And then the last thing I would just say is that I know that it is not in this scope, but I think the high school gym is really uncomfortable during serious parts of the year, to the point of it, I'm not going to claim that it's unhealthy, but it can be very challenging for athletes and for the students of gym to really feel comfortable participating. So I won't be on the board after the end of the school year, but I really am advocating that it's some near future that we really look at redoing the high school gym. It needs it, including having AC. Is that, you just look at the ceiling and it looks like in some parts it's, we've got masking tape holding corners together.
And that's
So,
definitely gonna be addressed in the long-range plan.
okay.
So because we have so many other things that we need to address in that hallway, not only the gym, but the locker rooms
Right,
and
all of
everything else. So I guess what we'll do is then
So
we'll
one
prepare.
question.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
Let
done.
me just hear from everybody
Oh,
else.
sorry.
so learning center, do we need to do anything there? Because I know
No.
that the gym doesn't have like cooling in there,
The
right?
Learning Center
The only
gym
area
has-
in the learning center that's not air conditioned is the gymnasium.
Okay, and that we're not touching now, right?
Right
Not part
now,
of
we're
this
not
plan.
addressing as part of this plan.
Okay.
Your feelings on this plan?
Oh, yeah, we'll do the combo, the 2.5.
Sandy?
Yeah, I think we should do 2.5. As I stated the other night, I just think it's really important that the public understand that we take this money each year and we put it into a separate account. And it's there for this reason. So it's not costing the taxpayers any money to do this. We're improving air quality for all students. And it's necessary. And I have to just give my kudos, because I have not heard the word grants so much in 23 years, sitting during a budget presentation.
Yes. lots
What
of
a
grants.
awesome word to continue to hear tonight. So kudos to you guys for doing that. And I have to say, Donnelly, I don't think I've ever seen a cut in the athletic budget in all my years, so good job.
Yeah, they've really worked hard
Good job.
to make reductions.
Alex?
Agreed, good idea.
One question, none of the work could be done this summer?
This summer, we have the masonry project going on. So we're
It's
gonna
outside.
have the district-wide masonry.
The other one's inside, you
this
said the first
summer.
project has nothing on the outside.
Well, the reason why we can't do the project is because we still need state education approval to get the building permit. They streamline the process because the grant funds have an expiration date. So we definitely will have a permit by the end of the summer, but we're definitely not gonna have a permit we would have to bid out that project now if we were trying to get it done during the summer. There's a huge lag in waiting for these unit ventilators.
The equipment's
It's gonna
not
take
available.
months just to get them in stock.
We like clean air.
Jennifer, as this project relates to the masonry project, assuming everything were to get approved, would we go back and make sure there's no overlap or conflicting work with the masonry project and what's being proposed here?
Severia already has looked at that, so some of the work that we have in the masonry project at the elementary school did include repairs to those air outtakes and intakes into the building, and he did say some of them are gonna have to be a little larger now. So that's all being incorporated in the plans and specs of the masonry project, because I told him, there's no way we're going back and we're gonna take apart what we just fixed.
Okay,
So,
great.
yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions before we move on?
So this is the budget development calendar for the rest of the budget presentation. So on the original calendar, we did have slated for March 21st, a review of PPS, athletics, and Boces, but we did do that this evening. So on March 21st, we'll have a full budget review. And on March 21st, you're going to adopt that legal notice that we're going to advertise in the papers. And then on April 11th, we're going to be doing another entire budget review. And that's the day that the board will adopt the budget. After budget adoption, no changes can be made to the budget at that point. On April 27th, we're going to have another review of the entire budget. We'll have a budget hearing on May 9th. In the meantime, I will be putting online our budget statement. We will be putting online a line-by-line budget showing changes for the taxpayers and any additional information that we're required to do, and also any additional information that we feel the public needs to know, especially about these projects and propositions, we'll be posting online.
Great, thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
To take it a little out of order before we go to the consent agenda, since we're speaking budget and voting, we moved item 8 of tonight's agenda for Mary to update the public and board on the budget vote and elections.
So you're gonna go now, Mary, is that all right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, good. Thought maybe we were gonna say no, I didn't know.
I'm ready. Jeff, does it make sense for her? I'm sorry, Mr. Nichols. Does it make sense?
Well, that's okay. Where do you want to be, Mary? You want to sit there or you want to come up to the podium?
Mary's like, you're just off screen if you're sitting.
What would you like to do, Mary?
Oh, go to the podium.
Okay.
He didn't want to go to the podium.
No, I
know you, Mary.
I don't like being in the spotlight.
That's good. You're doing a good job.
Okay, so the budget vote and election is on Tuesday, May 17th. It's always the third Tuesday in May. Polls open at 7 a.m. They close at 9 p.m. in the Pearson High School gym. There's 2 open seats that start July 1st, 2022 and goes for 3 years to June 30th, 2025. On March 18th,
The petitions for nominating the candidates will be available. They're available on the school's website. You can actually make up your own, and there'll be details about those packets on the website. They can also be picked up by me. There's also qualifications for membership to be a school board member, and that is on the school's website because there's about 9 different qualifications. On April 18th, by 5 o'clock, those nominating candidate petitions are due to me. And whoever turns them in 10 minutes later, we're going to do a vote and see who gets placed on the ballot. We do a picking of the numbers. Between April 18th and May 12th, we'll have an open voter registration in my office. And this year, we have a substitute district clerk who's at the Learning Center, Vicki Lawrence, will also be available for anyone who wants to register to vote. And that means that you're not registered in the general election or any other school district. April 19th, the absentee ballots for the applications become available. So if someone's not able to be there May 17th, they can pick up an absentee ballot application and fill it out and vote. April 21st, 5 o'clock is the deadline for military voters to come in to vote. More details on the school's website. And then the following is going to be posted on the school's website: the absentee ballot application, the board packets for people wanting to run, budget information for the public, military voters information, poll watchers information, and voter registration information. So I have it all on the website.
Any questions for Mary from members of the board?
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, moving back to the consent agenda.
I don't think, I also think people should know that you don't have to own a house to register to vote if you're new to our community. Rentals is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as you live
As long as you live
in the district.
It's gotta be your legal address.
Right, you're gonna legally live there as a renter or owner.
Yeah.
Moving back to the consent agenda item. Is there a motion for consent agenda items 7.2 through 7.16? Is there a second?
So moved.
Any discussion? Hearing no one, Mary, please open up the voting.
Okay. Now, Alex,
Aye.
that's unanimous.
I want to wish the robotics team good luck. I think they have 2 trips before the next board meeting.
Yep.
The first one's next week, so that's exciting. As we prove both of them tonight.
Before we move to public input number 2, just discussion items. Is there anything anyone from the board would like to bring up for a future meeting or agenda item? Now would be the time to bring that up.
I do. I've got a couple of things. I saw in the budget presentation today that we have about $3,800 left in the board line. So I was wondering if the board was amendable to have a kind of like another workshop to discuss policy and procedures and with maybe someone from NISBA, since we do have almost $4,000 left over. I don't think it needs to be like 6 hours. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Does need to be a 6-hour one, but I think like even if it is a remote one, since it's a workshop, we can do it remotely. But I think it's important that there's some things that we've seen and we need to relearn on policies and procedures, and I think it would be a helpful thing for the board to move forward. So I'll put that on the table, and then I also like to put on the agenda for. I won't be at the next board meeting probably, but going to be out of town. But I would like to have a discussion about public input 1, now public input number 2, now public input number 3. Timing. I felt that there needs to be some discussion on how we handle public input 1, especially when we have people waiting to present. So if we have somebody who said, last time we were gonna have a presentation on heating ventilation system, whether it's a half hour or 45 minutes of public input one, so we people aren't sitting there for 2 and 3 hours at a time. I think it's something that we should, as a board, have a discussion about. I don't believe at any moment, so please don't go out there and type all over social media that I want to squash the public. I don't want to hear from them. God knows I was one who stood at the podium for 3 years arguing about it. I want it, but I just think that we have to be, I think we have to be respectful of people who are waiting to do presentations that take, another hour of their time. So I think it's something that we should have discussion.
We'll calendar that for the first meeting in April when you're back, so you can participate in that. So Mary, if you can make a note, we'll have that discussion the first meeting in April.
I agree with that recommendation. I'm also,
Yeah.
I mean, if we wanted to have that conversation now, that's also, I don't know that it's taking that long, but.
We could have it now if we're all here, because
I don't know, I just think that, like I said, just it was something that I want to hear from the public. I want them to come. I want them to voice their opinion. I want them to be respectful. I want everything, but I think it's disrespectful of us to have people that are waiting 3 hours to give us a 45-minute person.
I also think it's, sorry, I also think it's important that whatever approach we take, we just establish it and be disciplined about it at every meeting, so that we're not at one meeting, like, like last meeting, special meeting, we were very disciplined. Like, this is, we're gonna read the rules, this is what we're gonna do. And then today we allowed extra public input, which was fine because it was not controversial topics, but I don't think we should be doing that. I think we need to just take an approach and stick with it every single meeting. So if we want to have more public input, that's fine. If you want to have less, that's fine too.
But let's
But
just make
whatever we have, let's just be disciplined about it.
So what about,
I,
sorry, Chris.
I'm just gonna make one more observation. We did several meetings ago have public input that went almost 3 hours long before we covered any content. One of the shifts that I've seen since then, which I think is helpful, is we've had the superintendent's report on a specific topic that had a lot of interest up front. And I think we saw in the subsequent meeting that there were less questions necessary because the superintendent's update addressed so many of those questions. That being said, when we had the meeting where it was almost 3 hours, many community members spoke for a second time in input one. And the policy we have very specifically says that no one speaks a second time unless everybody's had a chance to speak. And if it's going long at the discretion of the board, their ability to speak again might be in public input too. And I would just request that we would be more disciplined about that as well. We've never, in my time, we've never said no to someone participating. But I think one of the reasons why it went so long is people just kept getting back up and up and up. And it wasn't that we didn't want to hear, but to Sandy's point, it was almost 3 hours before we got to the content. And we had several people that were presenting that were left to wait for that. So I thought it was very helpful last time that you read the rules, because people sometimes come to these meetings. It could be the first time they've ever come and they don't know what the rules of public input is. And then because the rules are very prescribed, we follow them, to your point about just being consistent and disciplined.
I think I agree with Sandy. I think that we have great public input here. I think it's my understanding more generous than most districts, and we should continue to do that. I love when people come and yell at us. I think that's great. But I think we should enforce the rules that we do have. And I think there's been some times it's gotten all carried away at recent meetings. I think we should read them at all meetings. And I also think that it would be good for Brian and Sandy just to have the flexibility if there's a meeting where we've got someone who's coming to present, and sometimes we're paying those people to present by the hour.
You are.
To have the flexibility to say,
Plus the attorney that was waiting for us in executive.
yeah, so I think sometimes have the flexibility to say, we're gonna do a presentation before public input, even if, either because we're paying someone or because the superintendent is about to address a lot of the questions that people have. And you still have the ability, because there's public input too, you can speak at public input one, and then if something else happens that you don't like to comment again. So that's my thought.
Yeah.
I also think now that we're gonna do in person and Zoom, I like that, we're gonna start with, I think that's a good thing, and I think we should start with priority given to people in person, then follow, just what we did today. But just, again, I just need to establish that as a practice so that we're consistent every time.
And just to tag on to that, the fact that we are doing hybrid, it had been requested by several people, I think is fantastic. I think it'll just engage a larger community. And I don't know what level of communication we've done to parents and the community at large that this does exist, but we haven't been doing a hybrid for very long. So I would encourage us, if the paper's here, you can report on it and word can get out so that people that might want to come and participate can still do it from their kitchen.
Yorgos?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If we have someone presenting, I think it might be good to like just reorganize the agenda and just put them like at the beginning before the public input.
I don't think we have to change anything to do that. I think we just have the flexibility that when we have those
Yeah.
presentations, we'll just move agenda items. Doesn't have to change the agenda, but I wouldn't change anything else to that. We'll just adjust the agenda as necessary for that, not changing or reducing public input one or two.
Then Sandy brought up a retreat. There have been a couple of things that have come up this year.
I think we
Is
just
that
tackle
separate?
just one issue at a time.
I'm
Let's
sorry.
close one and then we'll go to the next. So if everyone's in agreement with that, we'll just, as we plan those, if we have
Well,
paid experts or people coming, we'll address that separately.
so I wrote a couple of things down when you initially spoke. So we obviously have the time limit for individual speakers at 3 minutes. I think, I'm not sure you were suggesting or not, establishing a total time limit for public input one. So is it a half hour, is it 45 minutes? That's something for the board to decide if you want a total time limit. I also.
We have discretion, so I wouldn't say we should put a hard time on it, because different things, my own opinion, I'm saying whatever else thinks, that different things will require different amounts of time. So we have the discretion to shorten it if it's going long. There's no,
Okay.
I mean, that's the way I
And
see it.
I think it's actually, I would disagree with you on that only because I think if we set something, then we are gonna be consistent meeting by meeting.
I don't want to.
I don't think we can limit public input. If we have 100 people that want to come, and even if it's a minute, I just personally don't think we should.
Well, we wouldn't be limiting public input, we would just be limiting the public input one.
Mhm.
And we'd have to create some, there's complications there, right? We'd have to create some priority list, like if 100 people come in person, how do you decide who gets the first half hour, 45 minutes? So there's complications there, but I also think it is problematic to use discretion. So for in that situation, it is problematic in saying, oh, today we happen to have our architect coming, so public input's only gonna be 20 minutes. So
We
like,
would then move the architect ahead. That's what we just said. Like, we'll adjust the agenda that evening to say,
I see.
we have a paid professional coming, so
Got
the
it.
school's paying hourly. We're gonna hear from him first and then move the public input one. So not
Got it. Okay.
And the two other issues that I heard Sandy in her comments were, one was establish a protocol related to the exchange between the public commenter and us. We have to be consistent with regard to that. Are we listening or are we interacting? Like tonight, we interacted. In previous sessions, we just listened. If you want that to be discretionary, I'm fine with it, but that's for your consideration. And then finally, do we want to limit the number of presentations in executive session one to one appearance?
public
Yeah.
input.
Yeah,
I think that's
The
fine.
policy does say, I believe our policy does say that they have a chance to, the public has a chance to speak in input one. But that if they want to speak again, everyone has to go ahead of them, and they may have to go in
Correct.
two.
It doesn't say go two, it says everyone be heard first before
Right.
someone speaks
But
second.
I do think that there is a problem with, we could have a scenario where public input, instead of 2 hours and 15 minutes, it's now 4 hours. I don't think that necessarily is healthy, only because we have decisions we have to make. And I would rather not be starting to vote on our agenda at 11:30 at night. So, I think we have to be cognizant of our ability to be really effective after 3 or 4 or 5 hours. So, and I'm not suggesting that the public shouldn't have an opportunity, but I do think that there should in some way be a time limit for us to get, so we can get to our agenda. Not that we're not going to hear from people, but that, if that had gone another hour, I don't know if I could have effectively engaged with the agenda at that point. Then we would have been at 10:30 before we were starting about our meat and potato agenda. So I think we have to consider not just having it be open no matter, if you have 100 people that come and want to speak, and I know that's an exaggeration, but we had 100 people over 100 people at our last meeting, Zoom meeting, that, 100 times 3, that's 300 minutes. That's right. That's 5 hours.
I think it's already in our rules, and we'll just read
So
rules
just-
going forward.
Just,
and-
just that you know, so
Yeah.
this came up many years ago, so public input is not guaranteed anyway.
So
It's a board accepted thing, and this district would not survive if the public could not come. So we already, we never, so we had public input too, like that was always there. David Diskin and another board member had huge confrontation about, do we have a public input, do we not? He was vehemently against it for that exact reason. And we said, okay, you know what, we're gonna do it, but we're gonna keep it limited, and we're gonna, so there is a whole policy, and it was only supposed to go, if you look at the policy, I think it was 45 minutes is what it ended up being. And it was a 4-3 vote for that exact reason. So, and I'm not saying that we do that. Like I said, I personally believe that we want to hear what the public says. I mean, we are voted in by the public. They're who, we want to hear from them. But I just think that going forward, we need to decide, does somebody get to speak twice, or do they speak once and go to public input too, which I believe is in that policy. I'm not 100%
It's
sure.
a reasonable recommendation, so that's.
Yeah, I mean, do we say, okay, after an hour, guys, that hour is the max we go on this because we have other stuff to do? I think that is reasonable. And I also think that when there is a hot topic such as the last one, I think a statement coming out, which you and I talked about, and I'll say, take the blame, that we probably should have come out and already said, made a statement first versus, letting everybody get upset with us, not understanding that we were probably all in agreement.
In the
with most of
agreement
what we
anyway.
said.
Yeah.
But I just think that moving forward, it can't be at a discretion of saying, okay, so I'm gonna say yes because this is a topic that I believe in, and I'm gonna say no because that's not, then we're gonna get hit with, we're not hearing it.
I think
But it has to just
speaking
be
once,
an
public
hour.
input one.
You get to speak once in public input one, it ends in an hour, and then you can public two, input two, we'll sit here for whatever. So that's what
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, 85% of our meetings, public input one is never taking more than a half hour.
No.
So I think putting an hour is very
Yeah,
generous on
I
it.
think that's.
I'd be supportive of that, especially since everybody could then, public input two is completely unlimited.
But
and
what's in
I
the
like
case
the
that they
idea-
haven't finished, like, all the people for the first time?
You ask if anybody else would like to speak before you give the opportunity to those who've already spoken.
Okay, so
To have
we're
other
still
comments.
gonna go through, like, everybody goes once and then we'll have
Oh,
this
I mean, that was
discussion.
that was the initial intent. I was on the committee of three with David Diskin to come up with recommendations for the board.
Yeah.
And we felt that all three of us felt very strongly on adding input one, but we also recognized to Sandy's point that there was some downside to it being unstructured, that there needed to be structure to it. And, based on what happened earlier this month, I would support, I don't believe the 1 hour is in the policy. I would support an amendment to the policy, whether it's an hour, 90 minutes, whatever it is, but some time frame to that. And then I agree with, we need to be consistent. It can't be that we just let because we know the person or like the topic and then we just really need to make it very clear.
So I think Yorgos's question was if you set the hour limit, and maybe I misunderstood it.
Yeah, not
and
everybody has
and
gone
not
like-
everybody has a chance to talk,
Yeah.
what do we do?
Yeah.
My understanding.
Why do we
of-
do that?
My understanding was that an hour is an hour.
Yeah.
And then it's cut off at an hour regardless of whether or not everybody has spoken or not.
And then everyone gets
they get
pushed
their
over to
chance
public
later.
input too.
Correct.
Well, what some other districts do, we've never done, we used to have a sign-up sheet to speak in public input. And was that public input two when we had it or one?
No, it's
One.
It was
One.
one,
Yes,
and we
we
had a
won
sign-up
one.
sheet outside, it was before there was any Zoom, and people signed up, and then they didn't, and then they went up there. But, it could be that if we're anticipating a hot topic, like earlier, last month, when we had all those people who spoke, that maybe if we think it's gonna go over an hour, people sign up, and then anyone else after that is spillover. I mean, it would be hard when you have 20 hands raised. How is, how do you choose which one you call on for public input one? So that's something that I think we have to think about, right?
That doesn't work on the hybrid formula for me. Because people who are there don't get to walk outside the door and sign up for public.
Right.
So I'm saying, I think that we have to figure out in the hybrid model, how we are really fair with the public so that they can engage, and I can't say enough, I think everybody on the board wants to hear from the public, administrators do, everyone on the team does. This is just about being effective with the time, but,
Sorry, Chris.
no, go ahead, so, I'm not sure how we solve that.
would it be worthwhile if we know there's gonna be a hot button topic to set up a separate meeting just to go through that, so we're not holding up other items on the agenda for the critical
Always a
meeting?
novel. I'm a firm believer of that.
You know, I think we've done that in the past with workshops, but workshops tend to be things that you can plan further out versus something that is a hot topic for that week, you know what I mean? It could be yesterday, it could be next week, we're not sure
Even
timing.
if you're in the moment and you see that there's a lot of activity for a
Yeah.
certain topic, you could say that based on our discussion today, we'll look to set up a subsequent meeting, next week to continue this discussion.
I think the challenge we may hear, and I like the idea, is that if it's a topic where we're making decisions at that board meeting, people are going to want to table their ability to give input to the board, because input one was created because people wanted to be able to share with us their thoughts on things that we were going to be deciding at the meeting. So they might have some impact about how we evaluate those issues.
I don't think anyone should go twice. I think people, if you want to speak again, you should go to public input too. I also think that you get your 3 minutes, whether that's a question or a statement, and then when you're done, if the question can be answered, which Jeff usually does, then it should get answered. But I don't know about the time limit. To me, there's not, I've been here, I think, almost 5 years. There's only a few times where there's that many people, and I think on those times, we should just sit and listen to them, because I think that it's, if there's something going on that many people feel like we want to comment on. So I wouldn't put a time limit on it, but I think we should.
One time per.
Once, and also, it's not public interrogation of the superintendent, and Jeff's very good at that, but I think the sort of back and forth, I think, is not really what it is intended to be. And if people want to ask questions, whether it's one question or 5, they can ask them during their 3 minutes, and then if there's an answer, they can answer. My personal view, I wouldn't.
I would agree with that.
But I just want that, it's late.
Yeah.
There's,
No, I understand. It's a
for
good point,
discussion
yeah.
here.
I think the caveat is if we have somebody who's waiting to present,
Yeah.
who's not part of the traditional team that we brought in, that perhaps we need to adjust that in some capacity. I'm not sure that gets incorporated into the
Well,
policy.
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think what we talked about before is
Put them ahead.
Brian or Sandy could just say, we're gonna have a presentation first,
Right.
either because someone's here or because,
We're paying.
yeah, or someone's gonna speak on something that may affect.
Yeah.
them.
So in terms of I haven't read the policy in a while. I don't know if the policy said that public input is the first thing in the meeting or not. But if it does state that, then we just need to adjust that language.
Doesn't have to be the first thing. It was just the intent in reading the policy was to be able to comment on things the board's going to take action on. It doesn't say it has to go first.
Right, good. And as long as it just say that, then I think that's the way to address it.
I don't really know what it says anymore, but I think that is what we create.
It doesn't specifically say that, but if you read it, it just
I'm
ability to
seeing
comment way in.
I
So,
didn't realize you had it. I haven't seen it.
And I think what we witnessed at that particular meeting was that we veered off the intent of public input. And it's
Yeah, I
just-
think
and I think that we should feel comfortable that if people are veering away from the spirit of public input, it's our responsibility to help get back on track. So whether it be a personal attack on a board member or targeted questions or discussions about a particular staff or community member, that's that's against our policy, and it's not the spirit of public input. So, the more structured we can be, the more productive the input is that we get.
great. Sounds like we have an answer on that. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm fine
Move
with
on.
it, as long as, I think the idea regarding the time limit was based on, the few times that we do have those longer meetings, and I just think we have to keep a watch on it, so I'm fine with having it unlimited. I just think we should, if we start to have longer and longer board meetings, we have to rethink it, because I know that at 10:30 at night, it was really hard to pay attention to the budget meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think if we get to the point where all of a sudden there's 100 people showing up at every meeting, we could always revisit it. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I think we're good for that.
Well, the other thing too is if we eliminated people speaking a second or third time in public input one, that probably would have been 45 minutes shorter.
Yep. All right, I think we've discussed this enough now, so we're gonna
Yeah.
move on. Heard enough about it. We know what everyone's.
Now you got public input too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That we're gonna go to. And I think I'll put some ideas out for your recommendations, Andy, and send an email to the board on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, just, this is not about not listening to our public. We want our public.
Non-public input, the workshop or second retreat.
Oh, I
We're
want.
moving on from that. That's what I said. I'll put
Oh,
some-
you didn't say, you told Chris you weren't there yet. No, he's there now. Let's go.
We're there. I said, we're done with the first one,
Okay,
we're moving on to the
let's
second.
go. Okay. Yes, thank you.
We'll send some recommendations or ideas out to the board for
Thank you.
consideration. And then we'll move to public input number 2. If there's anybody here or on Zoom that wants to speak at public input number 2, now would be the time to do it. Come on up.
Oh, I can come up. That's weird.
Get a, state your name and you have 3 minutes. First time speaker for my notes for the record, so everybody's okay.
I just want to know
Who's
when,
your name?
Caitlin Riley, Express News Reporter, Pierce Scratch. I just want to know, are you guys having an update on the park anytime soon? Because I felt like there was a previous meeting where you said that there might be an update on that soon.
We're getting close. We're getting close. Getting very close.
Okay.
In one of the next 2 meetings, we'll have an update.
Okay, and that will be like some sort of presentation or just kind of like a general?
I anticipate that at the next meeting, we'll have an update and depending on what that update is, it could be a detailed presentation about what's in store.
That's our hope.
Okay, so like a detailed presentation either at the next meeting or the one after.
Correct.
A detailed presentation probably coming within a month.
Yes, that's fair to say.
Safe to say.
That's safe to say.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Caitlin.
No hands. Mr. Online? Okay, so you're hearing no one else here. We will go to item 10 of tonight's agenda. Is there, before I ask for it, a motion on the executive session, if the board does go into executive session, the only action the board will take at the end of executive session is coming out of executive session for the purpose of closing the public meeting. With that, is there a motion to convene into executive session to discuss the collective bargaining unit negotiations and contracts?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Primary.
Thank you everyone for coming. It was great to see you, Betty. Again.